change it up at all.
I'm Chris Lee of the 14, joined by a good buddy of mine, Corey Chavous. And this introduction will take a minute. This guy played and started at Vanderbilt as a cornerback. He played 11 years in the NFL with the Cardinals, Vikings, and Rams. You have seen him on TV as an NFL draft analyst. He's a great friend of mine. He is the founder at draftnasty.com. This guy knows more football than just about anybody alive. Corey, welcome to the show today.
Man, thanks a lot for having me. I'm kind of pumped to be on your show. I'm a little jealous though. Your backdrop looks a little bit better than mine.
Yeah, it's got some books and some baseball cards and that kind of stuff that's near and dear to me. So, it's
Peyton back there. The one, who is that? The one that is like right beside the bat.
Our audience can't see that. That's a picture I drew of Dale Murphy when I was a kid. That was my sports idol. Yeah.
Back-to-back MVPs, 1983 and 84. 30. He had the exact amount of home runs both years, 36.
My favorite athlete of all time. Funny story. My kids are convinced that I am an artist and can draw. I've made like one good drawing in my life. It was that. That probably had a lot to do with him being my favorite player and putting some effort into it. But, yeah.
He was one of my favorite players too, man.
If you grew up in the South, who didn't like Dale Murphy, right?
Yeah. You know what's funny is that when he was, most people look at him, people forget that he actually won those 2 MVPs, first of all. But the other part is that you had Negro as a knuckleballer on that team in the later stages. And then you also had Bob Horner on that team as a guy that was a kind of the other power hitter that supported Murphy a little bit. And then as he got a little bit older, you got the next era of guys that come in there like Ron Gann and Nixon and all those guys. But he was something else, man. That's pretty cool.
Yeah, he's still my man. I'm still a Braves fan. I think they're going to hold off the Phillies, so pretty happy about that. I'm also happy that we got football. Thank God for football. Thank God it's about to get interesting because, I don't know what you can tell when these teams are playing Georgia Southern and some of the teams they play, and that's one of the better teams. But it's about to really hit. We had Florida and Alabama last weekend in a classic game. We had Georgia and Clemson a couple of weeks ago in an old-fashioned defensive struggle. You've seen Georgia and Alabama now. Look, in terms of talent, both elite teams, both teams that should be college playoff teams. Let me ask you a question. It's a two-parter, okay? Who do you think has more talent, Alabama or Georgia, and is that answer different from who wins the conference?
It's probably different because if you think about Georgia, for example, their talent, I went to their first game against Clemson and just watching the guys who didn't play. Like, for example, you got Washington on the sidelines at Darnell, like 6'7", 270, the tight end. He didn't even play in the Clemson game. And that's on the offensive side of the ball. And don't forget about George Pickens, who I believe is still possibly going to come out for the draft. And if he does, he's one of those players that didn't play this year or won't play this year with the ACL, but could still be a relatively high draft pick. It's almost like this is this version of an opt-out year. So they've got a lot of talent from them that I think people kind of, don't really take that part into consideration, the fact that – and then you look at their backfield, you've got Cook, and you also got Zamir White, and then you have a five-star kid that comes in again, which they normally rotate about 3 big running backs. And then defensively, I don't know where to begin. You got to start with Jordan Davis, who – in my opinion, last year, if he had come out, would have at least gone in the second round. Some questions about his conditioning. He's proven – you saw him against UAB. He literally ran 45 yards to run down the quarterback on a scramble. It's been pretty fun watching what he's done this year. He's got a really good partner in crime in Devontae Wyatt, and I think he's been good. He's been very good. He had 2 pass breakups in the Clemson game. And we could go on and on. I'm not going to go through all the names. N'Kobe Dean, and you've got Lewis Seen, and then you've got, Chris Smith. You saw what he did against the Nickelback, his interception return against Clemson. But he's been a pretty good player for a while too, Chris. So they got a lot of players.
And the kid from West Virginia hasn't even played yet, has he?
Camarda, by the way, the punter, he might be one of the best punters that I've graded in the last couple of years. I think now he does have a couple of he'll have the occasional shank like he did last year against Florida a couple of times, but consistently can get up to that 5-second hang time range with distance.
Yeah, I mean, you look at their stat sheet on defense, it's just like everybody contributes. They've got to go too deep every position. These are elite guys, and they've got them everywhere, 2 and 3 at every spot. It's you don't see many defenses like the one they've got.
Yeah, and then you look at Kendrick coming over from Clemson. How would he, get into the mix, and how would he respond? And he's been okay through the first. I thought he struggled last year late with Clemson, but I thought this year so far he's been pretty good. He can do a lot for you, former wide receiver. So, man, I mean, the cupboard is certainly not bare. Now, with Alabama, they lost Chris Smith earlier in the year, and I thought he was a budding, pass rusher. They still have a number of different guys. He was one of the guys I was really looking forward to kind of watching this year. But they still have a lot of – you got to think about Josh Jobe in the secondary. Mm-hmm. And then they've got people like Daniel Wright, who's also, still in the mix. And then, you look at even just some of the linebackers that they have, like Harris. Yeah. Those guys make them formidable on defensively in terms of just what they bring to the table. LeBron Ray, what I'm saying? And then when you go to their offensive line, I know you're pretty happy about Evan Neal in terms of you were saying that the thing about him. But I think with him, scouts are going to see something down the road.
Yeah.
It's not about really what he is now as opposed to what he can be. Mm-hmm. That's where people are going to be projecting with him. And, from an athletic perspective, you've got, Orlando Pace, my former teammate type comparisons.
Well, and for context, that's the thing that I was going to go into with you is you see what the pros think of Evan Neal. And let's be honest, you don't see guys that are 6'6", 6'7", 350 that move like that often. I mean, you can tell me how often that guy comes along, you would know. You brought up Orlando Pace. That's been a while, and that tells you something. But, the grades aren't always great. They're not bad. And I'm just kind of curious. A lot of that obviously is projection, but what do you think about the level of play that Evan Neal is at right now?
Well, I think it's fine. I don't think that, when you got a guy that's played multiple positions, that helps.
Yeah.
When you watch, I kind of compare him to a guy that I liked a couple years back, Mekhi Becton out of Louisville, who was also 6'8", about 365, and can run 5 flat, unbelievably, or 5'1". He's probably the best athlete to come out for the draft, period, at any position in the last, 10 or 15 years. You just don't see people do what he can do, what he was able to do. And this kid's similar athletically. For those guys, it's always going to be about consistent bend, consistent posture, hand placement, not getting too lazy. And when I say lazy, it's not that you play lazy. It's that it's tough to carry around 350, 60 to 80 snaps, particularly at the pace Alabama plays. So, I had a chance last week to talk with the former Alabama assistant, Charles Huff, who's at Marshall, and he talked about how they routinely run, 150 to 200 plays in practice at Alabama, or they can because of the depth that they have. And he's doing some similar stuff at Marshall. They're really doing a big-time job of running a lot of plays, but I just think that you have to take that into consideration when we're talking about Neal, too.
Let me ask you something. Would you rather see a prospect like that as a guy that just comes in as a left tackle as a freshman and just locks that position down for 2 or 3 years? Or would you rather see a guy like him who's played tackle on the other side, who's played guard? As a pro evaluator, which do you prefer? Maybe it just depends on who it is, but he's had an interesting career path, as you sort of pointed out. Yeah, I think you bring up a great point, CL, and I think I would probably prefer it be multiple positions. Yeah.
Because now you've got a fallback plan at the next level.
Yeah.
And if you got that fallback plan and he could come in and say, for instance, like he doesn't work out at left tackle, you can always be able to, possibly a guy like him should be able to because he can bend, because sometimes those taller guys inside
Yeah.
bend is an issue when you're going against Aaron Donald, but because he can bend some and he's going against those exterior edge defenders who are sometimes quick, sometimes a little smaller, you may have to get your body in a different position. That helps those guys when they do have to move inside the guard.
What do you think about Will Anderson on the other side of the ball? He is a potential defensive player of the year type guy. He's obviously going to be a high pro pick, but what do you see when you see him right now?
Well, I think he's long. I think he's rangy. I think for him it's going to always be about, with those guys that are that long and rangy, I think he's got pretty decent flexibility. I think he can change directions pretty fluently. Just maybe not being too leggy. I think that's the next thing. Power, at this stage, how is that developed? But it came into the year for him being so young, already being at a pretty high level. And I think he's still kind of establishing that he can keep guys off of him. And I think that's some of the things that you want to see from guys that you want to project that are going to gain as they get to grown man weight, as we call it, 10, 15, 20 pounds. You want to see a guy keep a guy off of him now until he develops those necessary secondary pass rush counters. So I think he has a lot of the tools that you want. And I think he's had stretches of being dominant.
Let's talk about a couple of other teams in the West that have tons of talent. That's Texas A&M and LSU. Both have had in different ways disappointing starts. LSU lost that game out in UCLA, which is not an awful loss, of course. And A&M is 3-0, but the Colorado game was ugly. I don't know that Colorado's that good. I thought their offensive line got manhandled to some degree by New Mexico. That's not something you wanted to see. How do you see those two teams going forward the rest of the year?
Well, I think it's going to come down to Johnson at quarterback for LSU. Yeah. Because in today's SEC, if you're going to win the Joe Burrow way, which is what he's trying to do with Johnson, I think Johnson has pretty good. He's a pretty good athlete, but maybe not quite as good as Burrow. I guess that's debatable. But I think if you're going to win that way in terms of being efficient in the passing game, you got to have a legitimate run game. And then, they lost one of their top running backs to injury for the year, or a guy that could have been a serious contributor. Their offensive line, I think you've got a couple of guys there in Deculus and Ingram that are been around for a while. They need probably a couple guys to step up so they can be a little bit more efficient in the run game to take some pressure off. There's got to be careful about being too pass-centric. I think that would be my concern with LSU. But defensively, I was disappointed how they started the year off. When you have a guy like Derek Stingley, I believe you should be able to game plan around him to help other players, which in my opinion would mean that you shouldn't have even had the defense you had last year as bad as it was. So this year they kind of carried over what was going on last year.
How do you make sense of Stingley and Ricks, okay? Because Pro Football Focus is not grading those guys great. I don't always agree with their grades, and they don't know what the coaches are thinking, right? They are, Stingley is maybe the most talented defensive player in the country, but you look at them, they gave up, 350 yards a game in passing. Now, I know that's thrown on safeties and linebackers, but I just see mixed signals all over the place with their defense, and I can't make sense of that.
Well, they're not as physical, I don't think, up front. They've got to get more physical up front. And I'm talking about the interior defensive line. Now, I think in terms of some of the poor grades maybe in the back end, there's been some missed tackles. You saw that in the UCLA game. Down the field, you got a missed tackle, and one of those was from Stingley. So I don't know how much that impacts people's grades or however they're grading it, but it certainly impacts when you're not finishing some of those open field tackles. That could spring a conversation about a number of different things in terms of mentality. And I think for them right now, I don't see that they weren't a great defense when they won the national championship to me. You know what I'm saying? But I thought they were at least a defense that flew around. They've got to at least get back to that level to be competitive now because they don't have the same offense.
What's your gut feeling on where Stingley goes? I mean, I presume he's coming out after this year. You'd have to think so. Where do you think he goes?
He's going to go high. I mean, because a guy that put it like this: would you look at Marshawn Lattimore? Would you take the games that he doesn't have great games in the NFL over the games that he does have them? Because when you get, for the most part, if you need Lattimore to lock somebody down, he can do it in the NFL. And that's kind of what you see with a guy like Stingley. Like when you can get a guy like him, you might be able to take some lapses from here time to time because this guy's capable of guarding top-notch receivers and doing it on a week-to-week basis. And he's long, too.
Yeah.
When he came out of high school, he was running 4.3 and flat back coming out of high school, 40-plus inch vertical. Now he says he's even faster. So you like to see, you lose a little bit of weight like he did. I'm not always in favor of that. I believe the more you weigh, the faster you are. Sometimes the more you lose, the quicker you are. So I don't know that those things kind of married up maybe so far, but I do think he has a chance to be a top 5 pick still.
Well, look, people can pick apart his game, and that's what happens when you're as elite as he was as a freshman, right? The microscope is on him all the time, but you look at PFF's data, nobody's completing passes against him very much. I mean, so you can say what you want, but when teams don't throw on you, I think that says that's most of the conversation right there, right?
Yeah. And when you don't get as many opportunities, the ones like you're talking about, Chris, are going to be magnified.
Yep.
And so, somebody might want to have an argument for Elam at Florida and say he's up in the mix with this guy. But I don't really believe that those guys are. Although I do think Elam's a pretty good cornerback prospect too. I just believe that when it comes down to it, you're going to have to go back to the best the guy can do. Kind of like Wan'Dale Moore. See what he's doing in the NFL, kind of 2 injury-plagued years at Purdue. And who's to say he might end up stinking it up the rest of the year. But that freshman year from Wan'Dale Moore, you have to go back to Derek Stingley's freshman year. I'm a big believer when you're evaluating talent, you always get the best of what somebody can do, right? I mean, it doesn't matter, because that's what you think they can be, right? You want to know what can he do. My uncle taught me that. My uncle, he played in the NFL a long time and coached in the NFL for, so long. He would always say, well, what can he do? He would always ask me that, what can he do? And so it made me start looking at things a little differently.
Well, and look, when you have a freshman season the way he had, he was, an All-American, I think had 6 picks. They won a national title. It is really hard. Like, I'll give you examples in baseball. Carlos Rodon a few years back, Kumar Rocker. Kumar Rocker got picked apart because, he hasn't improved, from his freshman to junior year. When you get off to that kind of start, it's a little bit of a curse, isn't it?
Yeah, and especially for Rocker. It was nowhere to go but down. It was nowhere to go but down for him. And kind of the reverse, right, for Leiter, SEC Newcomer of the Year, he ends up going higher when from body of work perspective, I mean, nobody knows SEC baseball better than Southeastern 14. And that if you really were to look at this entire work, set of circumstances in terms of comparing their careers, I mean, Leiter gave up, 14 or 15 home runs this year too, right? Yeah. So it's kind of the same difference when you look at those guys in terms of what they did or didn't do. But there was one guy whose trajectory was hotter at the right time.
Yeah. Well, speaking of expectations, they're there at Texas A&M. I watched them play. I think they lead the country in scoring defense. I know the schedule hasn't been great, but they've got talent. They got talent everywhere. I like their skill players. Jimbo Fisher spent half the game yelling at Calzada. Again, that 98 for New Mexico. I don't know the kid's name. I had the volume off. That kid was getting in their backfield every other play. Not what you want to see in that kind of game. I don't know, man. You've got to have a quarterback. You've got to have protection. A&M's got a lot of talent, and maybe this resolves, right? Sometimes teams work out the bumps. They got 4 new starters on the offensive line. Maybe those guys get ready, get more prepared by playing with each other. Maybe this turns around, but I don't know. When you see warning signs against New Mexico, I start to get concerned.
Yeah, I mean, you can't help but get concerned. Not because New Mexico's not going to be an improved football team, but because really when it comes down to it, when does the light come on for
Mm-hmm.
these threats? I was at their bowl game. You would have thought that this was going to be a year where Devin Ashane was just going to
Oh,
pop
yeah.
out and be unstoppable, right? And then also you already have Spiller coming back, and you got Weidemeyer. I mean, we haven't even gotten into their,
Mm-hmm.
you could argue that their left tackle, or I guess he moved over to right tackle now, Green, was probably, I thought he was one of the best 4 or 5 guards in the country last year. They moved him out to tackle. You thought that transition would be a little bit smoother. I think when you lose King early in the season at quarterback,
Mm-hmm.
and you've got a new signal caller who I thought did a great job on that final drive against Colorado, by the way, with the touch pass to Spiller. But I think you still got to find out who you are. And they're still trying to figure that out. He had a couple of big-time throws in last week in terms of down-the-field throws. They're going to need him to continue to stretch the field. Defensively, with DeMarvin Leal and really, to me, one of the most underrated pro prospects in the SEC and Jaden Peavy. And then, you've got a pretty talented secondary. I like the way Leon O'Neal's taking his game to the next level. I don't think that you can really, got Miles Jones back there too. I think their defense is going to be pretty good. And that length on their defense, because we haven't even talked about Tyree Johnson. They got a couple other guys like Jackson inside, number 35, who's kind of like a fire plug. He hadn't played quite as much this year so far, or he has, but he hadn't broken out like he did late. They've got a lot of players.
Well, that game against Arkansas this week is just fascinating because on one hand, I'm watching and I'm thinking Arkansas looks like the better team. A&M's got all these questions, but then in the back of my head, there's that voice that says, man, these guys were, preseason top 5 by a lot of people for a reason. You look at the recruiting rankings, you figured there were going to be some bumps in the road with the offensive line, now the quarterback deal. Like, is this going to be one of those things where everybody's thinking Arkansas has got them right for the picking, but are we going to look at this a week from now and saying, man, we should have known because look at the talent they've got, right?
Well, I think Treylon Burks has to play big, and then KJ Jefferson, they had the big 91-yard touchdown last week. And Jefferson, I think, threw for over 300 on 13 completions, which is phenomenal. Mm-hmm. Kind of reminds me of that last game they had last year against Missouri, because Burks is the real deal. Now, he's probably the best. You could argue he's got probably almost 11-inch hands. He's going to be that riser as a receiver out of the SEC this year. Treylon Burks, about 6'3", 230. The guy is extremely powerful. I thought he was played fast a year ago. He's a guy I think that Texas A&M has to make sure to take out of the game.
Yeah.
Now, for me, it comes down to Clary inside and Cunningham on the edge, offensive line-wise, against those guys I mentioned earlier. If you cannot block that front, it doesn't matter about what you think you can do offensively.
See, that's the other thing. You watch the Texas-Arkansas game, and the way that they dominated in the trenches against Texas, to me, is really concerning if you're A&M.
So you feel like you're talking about their offensive line, right?
Yeah. Sorry, I misunderstood you.
They're gonna do that. That's where I'm glad you said that, because I just don't believe that Texas's defensive line is close to Texas A&M's.
Okay.
So now if you now here we go. Let's find out if Texas A&M, if they're as good as advertised, which I believe they are, then you've got to shut down this offense in terms of just dominate the game, the defensive front, and they're capable of doing that.
So you're taking A&M in this game.
I think they're the more talented team up front. Now, in terms of skill position, there's no skill position player more dangerous than you could probably tie it between Burks and Ashane, Devin Ashane. Although maybe the best natural runner left in the game is Spiller. He's a hell of a player, but Burks and Ashane are exciting.
Oh, they were. Look, that game last week was kind of a dud. Again, I didn't like the way they played, but those two kids put on a show at times. That's for sure.
Yeah, and really, I mean, but I guess my question is, do you think KJ Jefferson is ready for the moment?
See, I don't know. I mean, he's gotten better, right? But I mean, this is a different test.
Yes, yes. But he definitely had, when I first saw him last year and he was coming in for Felipe Franks, who, by the way, ended up getting that backup job in Atlanta, which I know that was probably pleasing to a lot of people in the SEC. But I thought he showed some stuff late in the year, Chris, that showed that he could do it. And some of them were just the deep shots he took. And it was that guy I was talking about again, Treylon Burks, like I said, against Missouri. He showed some stuff in that game, some flashes. I don't think he started this year real well, but I thought last week he kind of put it together.
Let's talk about a couple other guys in the SEC, not on high-profile teams, but have really played well. You mentioned Missouri. Let's start there. Tyler Beatty now is a bigger volume workload guy, and it's been a huge volume. Now, look, they have not played good defenses, so let's be really clear here. But he's versatile. I think he's leading the league in yards from scrimmage. What do you see in him? Is he a pro prospect?
Yeah, he is. And I've talked to some scouts who like him. I think that, it's going to be a question as to whether or not, he's going to be just a change of pace. Now, remember, I'm a big comparison guy because don't tell me a guy's a pro prospect unless you can find some comps. And I think for him, you're looking at Myles Gaskin in Miami. You could also look at they even had another back from Washington that went down there, Salvon Ahmed, also from Washington the next year. That's the kind of back he has to be. You know what I'm saying? Now, for me with him, there's a lot more maybe even in the passing game that he gives you than maybe, or at least on the same level as those guys. They can catch the ball. And he's probably about 5'10", 5'9", about 200, 205 pounds. So there's comps for that around the league right now in terms of being able to find a role.
Wan'Dale Robinson at Kentucky has been terrific so far. And again, let's look at the schedule. It's easy to get open against some of those teams. But he was a really good player at Nebraska. One side?
I said Levis too, right?
Yeah, well, Levis has been good too. Yeah, I want to talk Robinson first, and we'll get to Levis.
I definitely want to talk Robinson.
Sure. Well, let's hear. I mean, he's a guy that he can get the ball and rushing. Again, this isn't the first time he's popped. I think he was Player of the Year in Kentucky when he was in high school. So no doubt he's got the talent. What do you see in him as a pro?
Well, I think he's shown that he can track the ball down the field. I think that was something that you wanted to see was whether or not. Because, like you mentioned, at Nebraska, he was more of like, you had him in multitude of roles, more like a possession receiver, get the ball in his hands. He kind of took over the J.D. Spielman role at Nebraska. Nebraska had him in before he left and transferred, except he got the ball more as a running back.
Yeah. And
so I think that experience, the fact that he's run the ball, think more for him like Tony Pollard.
Okay.
That's a good comparison in terms of what he could be. That's kind of something similar to how Pollard was used at Memphis. That's kind of how I see Kentucky use him. However, Pollard, had the stretches where he was a downfield threat, at Memphis. This guy may be doing a little bit more of that up to this point in the season. Just the way he's tracked the ball down the field has impressed me. He's got 3 straight 100-yard games receiving.
Yeah. I mean, he's been really consistent. You brought up Levis. I was a little surprised. He didn't get the job at Penn State, although, the way that game went against Auburn, maybe we know why, right? But he's got some tools. He's looked pretty good so far. Is he on your radar a little bit as an NFL quarterback?
Yeah, and I'm glad I'm glad we were talking about him because immediately when I saw him this year in terms of, remember when he was at Penn State, they used him more as a runner. That was the real deal with him there. He was more of like come in and give you a little spark. He could throw the football, but immediately when they got here to Kentucky, I guess Kentucky saw him differently than Penn State because, again, Sean Clifford at Penn State was a 4-star recruit out of one of the top states in the country for football out of high school, and he went to a good high school. So it was going to be tough to beat him out with the pedigree he had. But Levis, since he's been in Kentucky, he's pushed the ball down the field aggressively, and it's looked natural. I feel like his motion has been natural. I feel like he's been comfortable in the pocket. He's seeing the field. Now we got to see him against some better teams, but he's seen the field well early.
The other guy on their team, maybe their best player for 3 years running over that span, is Darien Canard, who just gets, Pro Football Focus must own stock in this kid, the grades they give him every week. And I'm not saying they're undeserved, but I'm sure you've kept an eye on him. What is your opinion of him as a pro?
Well, I think the big thing with him is when you're that big and you're light on your feet.
Yeah.
That makes a difference. You know what I'm saying? Like, I watched him in a couple games last year where, even if he does get beaten, he's able to recover pretty effortlessly. Now, I thought it was up and down at times in terms of just finish. When I say that's one of the things I look for with offensive linemen is the ability to finish. Because there'll be some reps where you see him run 20 or 30 yards down the field and take a guy out, at the end of a play on a screen or something like that. But then there will be other plays where he didn't quite have that same finish. And so when you watch that, and that gives you a little bit of concern because, again, it goes back to the weight. You're talking about a kid that's up in that 300 and probably he had to get down in weight. I believe it was around 347 or something before last year. He had lost weight. So you're talking about a guy that's been up around, over 360 bills. So that takes a lot out of you down to be consistent with technique. But he is light on his feet. He's strong. He's got and I think for the most part, he gives you some positional versatility again.
So am I hearing you right? You think that's a conditioning thing more than a motor thing?
Yeah. Well, sometimes it's I think sometimes what we don't realize in terms of just people in general, when you're trying to put all these guys into like one, you paint them all with a broad brush, is that it's different for a guy carrying 365 pounds than it is a guy carrying 315. That's a 50-pound weight difference. So if this guy at 365 gives me 7 good reps compared to the guy at 315 giving me 10, that's understandable. That's that 50-pound weight difference. So it's the challenge for these guys carrying that weight, even if you can carry it effectively, Chris, is to be able to consistently down to down execute hand placement, execute footwork, execute, if you're on the backside, the correct hand steps, all those things that you got to do as an offensive lineman that require the details. That's what's tough to execute.
Well, it's easier to fix conditioning than it is motor, isn't it?
Yeah, well, some guys just have a natural nonstop motor. I think part of motor is conditioning. So if you're 365 and you're in the best shape of everybody on the field, then you can have a motor. But you can't have a motor at 365 if you're just trying to manage carrying 365 is kind of my point.
Yeah. Neither of us have experience in that, but
well, I don't want to have any experience in that thing. I'm making sure I don't, or I'll try my best.
No, I'm with you. I've got a 7-year-old to chase around, so and a dog. But hey, Corey, great conversation today. Anything else from the SEC? You and I could sit here and talk all night, but I want to save some things for future weeks, which I hope we will be doing. Anything else from the SEC of note, whether it's something you watched, a player you wanted to talk about, a matchup coming up? I just give you the canvas here to paint on for a bit.
Yeah, I want to talk about Chris Pierce Jr. from Vanderbilt. I don't think the numbers have been great. I don't know that there was anything special that happened last week in their game. That I know they probably tried to give him the ball again. But I would say this, if people take a look and take the curtain back of the record and all of that, and I know Clark Lee, who I think is going to be a heck of a coach at Vanderbilt. I'm really happy that they hired him. And I'm also very happy about Candace Story Lee. But the big thing that what I want to talk about with Pierce is the acrobatic plays that he makes. Because we just got to talking about weight. At 6'4", 240 pounds or 235, some of the acrobatic plays that he can make, I just think that even going back to that Florida game from last year, and then I saw a catch he made when they lost to East Tennessee State on the sidelines. His hand-eye coordination, his athleticism, he's a guy that has a lot of upside to me as a H-back kind of, it could be a slot, big slot, whatever it may be. Some NFL team, I mean, and he may not get, I don't know if he'll get drafted or not, but I know one thing, he's got a lot of ability.
He made a catch, and you saw it because you were in the building when they played Colorado State, that other than the ball that the DB for Oklahoma picked against Nebraska, is the best catch I've seen in college football all year. I still don't know how Chris Pierce got the ball. I mean, he was completely behind a defender, reached around him, got it with one hand, and I think you guys, everybody was fooled. No, he could not have caught that. But then you see the official mark the play, and he did.
Yeah, I mean, that's one example, but I mean, there's so many others that, there are others, I guess, that he's had. I actually like the one he had against East Tennessee State on the sidelines more. It was just a normal play to most, unless you saw it, the way he corralled a ball and stayed. I mean, his body control around the sidelines. I just believe he's a guy that, there's some things that you can defeat him with on the outside. Just, again, it goes back to what we were talking about with a 365-pound offensive tackle. The same thing with a 240-pound wide receiver. There's no difference because you're not 200 pounds. You're not 315 as a tackle. You're not 200 pounds. You're not the normal size tackle or receiver. Bigger challenge to play at the same clip down to down.
Well, and I think he'll have some things going for him. Intangibles, seems to be a good kid, smart kid. Is not going to cause you problems. A little bit of a leader. That always helps. But, he's a unique player. He's a little big for a receiver, maybe not big enough for a tight end. What do you do with him if you're a coaching staff in the NFL? You guys draft Chris Pierce, you sign him. If you're the coach, and maybe it depends on system, right? But what do you do with that kid? Do you bulk him up? Do you slim him down? Do you make him a receiver, tight end? If it's your call, what do you do?
I think I would probably go with the H-back and let him do some flex mismatches. Because I think if you've seen, he's definitely faster and quick enough to do those responsibilities. And I think that, if you're trying to compare him to Alshon Jeffery, you're talking about maybe 10 or 15 pounds heavier than even him. Now, I don't know how much he weighs, so I'm just going by the guide. I mean, heck, he might be 255 for all we know. Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, we're going by what we've seen so far. And I'm also going by his frame. I'll tell you this, though. I think he carries his weight well.
Yeah.
And with the body control that he has, I'm not as concerned about his weight. Remember, you've got he's not going to be a 4-3 guy, but I think he runs okay. So they got to continue to try to find ways to get him the football. And I definitely believe that H-back is basically, most of those guys nowadays in the NFL are not blockers.
Yeah.
And he'll block. He'll go in and crack block. I've seen him. He'll get physical. So,
well, and he'll do some things every now and then, like he had a play against Purdue a couple of years ago where he caught about an 80-yard touchdown. Now, I don't think there are a lot of defenders around. And then last year, he has this romp through the Florida secondary. He's knocking people down, winning a foot race, and we're all going, wait, where did that come from, right? So he has done some things that, not just the catches that you mentioned, the blocking. He's shown a little bit of ability to get in space and make some stuff happen too.
Yeah, and I think the thing you got to be really aware of is that Vanderbilt players typically go to the NFL and succeed. They make it. You look at Trent Sherfield, he's kind of taking reps from a first-round draft pick out in San Francisco. So my advice to people when you look at Vanderbilt football, I know that there's a lot of negativity surrounded from past years, but, give this staff and give this team a chance and give – I know last week it was 14-14 with Stanford. That's an improvement from last year. So, yeah. I think you have to start with a clean slate, and I think you got to give this staff an opportunity to start an identity, because losing to East Tennessee State, they very easily could have lost this team, and I don't think they have at all.
Corey, you got a lot going on. You're on the road for CBS several games a year. You do tons of work with the draft, watching film. You've got everything going on at Draft Nasty. I want to give you the floor before we end today just to advertise your products, tell people where you are, where to follow you on Twitter, and all the things that you'd like to get out with what you do.
Yeah, well, no, I mean, at Draft Nasty it hasn't been real active in terms of the website. We concluded with the NBA draft, and it's been pretty much that was it for right now. And then, coming up in the next couple of weeks, probably some of the stuff that we'll have is going to be some of the things that we've been talking about today, but really a lot of other players that have not really gotten a lot of recognition. We're going to be having a lot of those guys spotlighted in the next couple of weeks, because there are a ton of players out here, and I'm even talking about on the FCS level, that have really caught our eye. And I'll start off by talking about one that we're going to spotlight, and that's Pierre Strong out of South Dakota State. And we just talked about Chris Pierce. He might be under the radar, but that's really what we're going to give you. But Pierre Strong's one guy from South Dakota State, and there's so many others that have really kind of caught our eye in the first couple of weeks of the season, and they're under the radar guys.
Well, and for people that don't know, your rep is an NFL guy because that's what you've done a lot of TV work on, but you cover basketball and baseball too, and you're a real wealth of knowledge on those drafts also.
Well, yeah, I have had a lot of help with that. And I mean, you've been an aficionado from, being back in the day. We're doing a lot of coverage as well, but there have been several people, whether it's Tim Kaiser, Troy Jefferson. I could just name names and names. Nathan Rudeau. I could go on and on with people who've contributed and been very, very great contributors to the baseball and basketball coverage, and the internships that Morgan Martin helped out. I mean, we've had a lot of different people that have helped out with the product.
Hey, Corey, it's a thrill to do this today. So much fun talking with you. Let's do this again soon.
Absolutely, man. I appreciate you having me on, Chris, man, and I can't wait to see what you got next. I want to see what you're going to say about my man, Chris Pierce Jr.
Yeah, well, I like Chris. He's grown on me as I've watched him over the years. So he's yeah. He gets lost in some more talented players, but at the end of the day, he usually gets the job done, right?
Yeah, I mean, they've got some good players, though. I just wonder, again, it's been interesting to see, like, you sometimes we forget that the team was in the bowl game, and I think it was 2018, the Texas Bowl. They probably should have won that game. So that wasn't like that was 8 years ago or something.
Yeah.
These guys were on the team.
Let's hope it gets better for them. I know you guys put in a lot of blood, sweat, and tears your time.
You don't seem too encouraged, though.
Well, look, I watch a lot of SEC ball, right? You do too, and I just think there's a talent gap that's going to take a while. It's not a James Franklin fix, right? They're not going to be bringing in JUCOs and probably a lot of transfers, and they just look. He was dealt a bad lot, right? They don't have the size and speed right now that the rest of the league has. I mean, I sit in front of.
They do have a lot of length. I think that's the big thing on defense.
Yeah.
You got a lot of length, and I think that I was, and that was the thing I was surprised about. You got to think about when you look at the length that they have on defense. That's what you got to use to your advantage. You got to cloud passing lanes. You go against a guy like Texas A&M's quarterback. You got to make it a rough day for him up front. And I'm just talking about batting balls down. Now, you got to get people to throw it to bat them down, right? So that means stopping the run, but that's a big key for them. They got to be able to stop the run. If you don't stop the run, all bets are off. It doesn't matter how long you are.
Well, and they have done that, but getting to the passer has been another story.
Yeah, and I'm a believer that a pass breakup on third down from a defensive lineman is the equivalent
a sack. Yeah.
So I mean, I've seen that from them. Gonna have to do that more as the year goes on.
Yeah. Hey, Corey, thanks again for joining us. Again, we're going to be hopefully doing this throughout the football season, talking a lot of draft prospects, and not just the kids coming up, but maybe guys that you're seeing as a freshman. You're a wealth of knowledge, and it's been so much fun doing this today.
No, thanks a lot, man. I appreciate you having me, Chris, man. And have a great one, man.
You
and
too.
Leave the dog alone, man.
The dog has not had an outburst since we've done this, and that's a major upset because, trust me, I've done some broadcasts earlier in the day, and that's not how it went down. So, all right. He's Corey Chavous of Draft Nasty. I'm Chris Lee, the host at Southeastern 14. We'll see you again very soon.